When we talk about affairs in so-called good marriages, the first impulse is to look for what was wrong in the relationship. Was there neglect? Was there conflict? Was there dissatisfaction at home? But what if the question is incomplete? What if, in many cases, the affair is not primarily a protest against the marriage, but a protest against the self that has been living inside that marriage? The psychotherapist Esther Perel often reframes infidelity not simply as a search for another person, but as a search for another version of oneself. This is deeply unsettling because it complicates the moral simplicity we often crave. It forces us to look beyond good partner, bad partner, and into something far more nuanced: identity. In many stable marriages, life becomes organized around responsibility. Careers are built, children are raised, mortgages are paid, routines are optimized. On the surface, everything functions. There may be affection, respect, even friendship. And yet, somewhere along the way, one partner may begin to feel a quiet internal erosion, not necessarily unloved, not necessarily unhappy, but diminished. The ambitious dreamer becomes the practical provider. The spontaneous lover becomes the exhausted parent. The curious adventurer becomes the predictable spouse. These roles are not wrong. They are necessary. But when identity becomes overly narrowed by responsibility, something inside begins to ache. An affair can then emerge not as an escape from the partner, but as an escape from the self that feels confined. Notice how often people who engage in affairs describe feeling alive again. I felt desired. I felt interesting. I felt free. These words are less about the third person and more about the internal experience. The affair becomes a mirror, reflecting back a forgotten vitality. This is not a justification. It is an explanation. Because if we reduce affairs to simple dissatisfaction with a spouse, we miss the deeper psychological layer. Many people who step outside their marriages will tell you they still love their partner. They value the stability. They respect the life they have built. That is what makes the situation so perplexing. The affair is not always a replacement. It is often a reclamation of youth, of risk, of autonomy, of sexuality untethered from obligation. In long-term partnerships, especially those defined by duty and predictability, certain parts of the self can go dormant. The part that flirts without consequence, the part that dreams recklessly, the part that feels uncontained. If those parts are not integrated into the primary relationship, they do not disappear, they wait. And when an opportunity arises, a new person who sees you without the accumulated history, without the daily stress, without the defined roles, that dormant self can feel electrified. Suddenly, you are not someone's spouse or parent. You are simply you, desired, interesting, chosen. This experience can be intoxicating precisely because it feels like rediscovery. But here is the tragedy. Instead of bringing that rediscovered vitality back into the marriage, it is often lived in secrecy. The individual separates their identity into compartments: responsible partner at home, enlivened self elsewhere, and compartmentalization fractures integrity. The deeper question then becomes, why did that part of the self feel unwelcome or inaccessible within the marriage? In some cases, it was never consciously excluded. It simply faded under the weight of routine. In other cases, subtle relational patterns discouraged it. Perhaps vulnerability was dismissed. Perhaps ambition was minimized. Perhaps sexuality became purely functional. When identity shrinks in silence, resentment grows in silence as well. So, if we want to understand why affairs happen in good marriages, we must ask, are both partners still fully present as evolving individuals? Or have they become efficient roles managing a shared life? Because love that sustains identity is different from love that contains it. The solution is not suspicion or control, it is expansion. Can partners create space within the marriage for reinvention? Can they allow each other to grow, to rediscover, to express neglected parts of themselves without needing a third party as catalyst? This requires courage. It requires conversations that go beyond logistics and into longing. It requires asking, who are you becoming? And also, who have you stopped being? Affairs often expose not only relational fractures, but personal ones. They reveal the hunger to feel alive, significant, expansive. The real work is not merely preventing betrayal. It is ensuring that no essential part of the self has to leave the relationship in order to survive. Because when you must step outside your marriage to find yourself, the problem is not only about love, it is about identity. If affairs were only about bad marriages, the narrative would be simpler. But many betrayals emerge not from constant fighting or obvious dysfunction, but from something far quieter: emotional loneliness inside functional stability. A couple can cooperate beautifully. They can run a household like an efficient organization. They can co-parent with discipline. They can appear united in public, even affectionate. From the outside, nothing seems broken. And yet, internally, one or both partners may feel profoundly alone. This is the paradox of the good marriage. Stability is present, crisis is absent, but emotional intimacy, the sense of being deeply known, has thinned. The psychotherapist Esther Perel often distinguishes between love and aliveness. I would add another distinction here, between partnership and intimacy. Partnership is the structure. Intimacy is the experience. You can have one without the other. Emotional loneliness does not always announce itself dramatically. It often begins with small omissions. You stop sharing certain thoughts because they seem unimportant. You stop bringing up certain frustrations because you don't want to disturb the peace. You stop expressing certain desires because they feel inconvenient. Gradually, the range of what is shared narrows. Conversations become logistical. Who's picking up the kids? Did you pay the bill? What's the plan this weekend? Necessary, yes, but not intimate. Intimacy requires exposure. It requires revealing doubts, insecurities, fears, and aspirations that may not fit neatly into daily responsibilities. When that exposure declines, emotional oxygen declines with it. And here is the critical nuance. Emotional loneliness can exist even when physical presence is constant. You can share a bed and feel unseen. You can exchange "I love you" and feel unknown. When someone feels unseen over time, a subtle hunger develops, not necessarily for sex, but for recognition, to have someone look at you with fresh eyes, to ask questions that go beyond performance, to be curious about your inner world rather than your daily function. An affair often begins not with seduction, but with conversation. Someone listens, someone notices, someone asks, "How are you really?" And if that question has not been asked in a long time at home, its impact can be disproportionate. The attention feels intimate. The validation feels restorative. The novelty feels energizing. And slowly, the emotional energy that once circulated within the marriage begins to circulate elsewhere. What makes this particularly tragic is that in many good marriages, the distance was never intentional. Both partners may have been overwhelmed by responsibility. Both may have assumed that stability equaled success. Both may have believed that love was self-sustaining. But intimacy is not self-sustaining. It is cultivated. When emotional check-ins become rare, when curiosity fades, when vulnerability feels unnecessary or unsafe, a relational vacuum forms. And vacuums tend to be filled. This does not mean that every emotionally lonely person will have an affair. But it does mean that loneliness inside a relationship can create susceptibility. The deeper issue is not simply unmet needs, it is unexpressed needs. Many individuals who engage in affairs never articulated their loneliness within the marriage. Perhaps they feared sounding ungrateful. "We have a good life. Why am I complaining?" Perhaps they feared hurting their partner, or perhaps they did not fully understand their own hunger until someone else awakened it. Emotional neglect in good marriages is often mutual and unintentional. It grows through complacency, through the assumption that shared history automatically guarantees ongoing connection. But history does not guarantee intimacy. It guarantees familiarity, and familiarity without renewal can become emotional distance. The antidote is not constant intensity, it is consistent depth. Are you still sharing what worries you? Are you still revealing what excites you? Are you still allowing your partner to witness your vulnerability, not just your competence? When emotional life is shared regularly, there is less temptation to seek that sharing elsewhere. This requires courage, because emotional exposure always carries risk. You might feel misunderstood. You might feel dismissed. But the alternative, silent loneliness, carries a different risk. Disconnection disguised as peace. So when we ask why affairs happen in good marriages, we must consider whether the relationship became efficient but not expressive, stable but not searching, functional but not fully intimate. Because people rarely leave for chaos when they already have stability. They leave for connection when they feel alone. The real question then is not simply, are we a good couple? But are we emotionally alive with each other? A marriage does not fail only from conflict. It can also fade from quiet distance. And distance unspoken is distance that grows. If identity hunger, emotional loneliness, and the erosion of desire help us understand why affairs can occur in good marriages, then we must examine one final and often overlooked factor: conflict avoidance. Many couples take pride in saying, "We don't fight." On the surface, this sounds admirable. It suggests compatibility, maturity, ease. But sometimes, the absence of visible conflict is not a sign of harmony. It is a sign of suppression. In many stable marriages, partners learn early what disturbs the peace. They notice which topics create tension: money, sex, in-laws, ambition, disappointment. And gradually, often unconsciously, they begin to step around those topics. They tell themselves, it's not worth the argument. We're fine. Why create drama? And so they adapt. They minimize their frustrations. They edit their complaints. They swallow their resentments in the name of stability. The psychotherapist Esther Perel has often suggested that the quality of a relationship is not measured by the absence of rupture, but by the capacity for honest engagement. Conflict, when handled respectfully, is clarifying. It reveals desires, disappointments, boundaries. Without it, important truths remain buried. Avoided conflict does not disappear. It goes underground. Over time, small grievances accumulate. A partner who feels underappreciated says nothing. A partner who feels sexually dissatisfied remains silent. A partner who feels intellectually disconnected chooses politeness over confrontation. Each unspoken truth becomes a quiet withdrawal of energy. What makes conflict avoidance particularly dangerous in good marriages is that everything else may appear functional. There is cooperation, there is shared responsibility, there is civility, but beneath the civility, there may be unresolved tension, and unresolved tension seeks expression. Sometimes that expression is passive: emotional distance, irritability, disengagement. Other times it is more dramatic. An affair can become an indirect protest. Instead of saying, "I feel invisible," the person seeks visibility elsewhere. Instead of saying, "I am dissatisfied," they pursue stimulation outside. Instead of risking confrontation within the marriage, they externalize the unmet need. This does not make the betrayal less painful, but it does make it more comprehensible. Conflict avoidance is often rooted in fear: fear of rejection, fear of escalation, fear of destabilizing something that is otherwise good. Particularly in marriages where there is much to lose: shared history, children, financial interdependence, the stakes of confrontation feel high. So partners protect the structure by sacrificing honesty, but intimacy cannot thrive where truth is consistently filtered. In fact, the absence of conflict can create a dangerous illusion that both partners are fully satisfied. Without disagreement, there is no feedback. Without feedback, misalignment grows unnoticed. Healthy conflict says, "This matters to me." Avoided conflict says, "I will manage this alone." And managing alone is the seed of isolation. In many affairs, the third party becomes the person with whom difficult conversations finally happen. The individual feels safe expressing dissatisfaction, ambition, sexual curiosity, or frustration, not because the third party is superior, but because the emotional risk feels lower. There is less to lose. The tragedy is that the marriage may never have been incapable of handling those conversations. They were simply never attempted with full vulnerability. A good marriage that avoids conflict often values peace over authenticity, but peace built on silence is fragile. Growing tension without dialogue creates pressure, and pressure eventually finds release. The deeper question for couples is this: do we create an environment where dissatisfaction can be voiced without catastrophe? Can we tolerate discomfort long enough to understand it? Or do we prioritize smoothness over sincerity? Conflict, when approached with respect, is not a threat to stability. It is a mechanism for renewal. It allows the relationship to adjust before fractures widen. Avoiding conflict may preserve calm in the short term, but it can erode connection in the long term. So when we examine why affairs happen in good marriages, we must consider whether the marriage was truly open or simply orderly, whether partners felt free to express disappointment or obligated to maintain composure, because intimacy is not built on the absence of tension, it is built on the courage to face tension together. If identity hunger and emotional loneliness help us understand why affairs can take root in good marriages, then we must also confront another uncomfortable truth. Desire does not thrive on stability alone. Security is essential for attachment. It allows us to relax, to trust, to build a life. But erotic desire operates by a different logic. Desire requires space, novelty, unpredictability. It is fueled by mystery, by the recognition that the other person is not entirely known, not entirely possessed. This is where long-term partnerships encounter a quiet tension. The very qualities that make a marriage good, reliability, routine, predictability, can gradually diminish the erotic charge that once felt effortless. The person who once felt slightly mysterious becomes familiar. The body that once felt electric becomes integrated into daily life. The lover becomes the co-manager of responsibilities. And familiarity, while comforting, is not inherently erotic. The psychotherapist Esther Perel has often explored this paradox. We seek security in love, but we crave excitement in desire. In the early stages of romance, uncertainty amplifies attraction. You do not fully know where you stand. There is anticipation, there is imagination, there is risk. In a stable marriage, much of that uncertainty disappears. You know where you stand, you know your partner's habits, reactions, rhythms. There is less suspense. None of this is inherently negative. But if couples do not consciously cultivate vitality, desire can quietly flatten. In many good marriages, partners stop seeing each other as separate individuals with independent worlds. They become extensions of each other's routine. They witness each other mostly in functional roles, stressed, tired, preoccupied. Desire requires distance, not emotional distance, but psychological differentiation. It requires the ability to look at your partner and still feel a sense of otherness. When that otherness fades, attraction can soften. An affair often reintroduces precisely what long-term stability lacks: novelty. A new person sees you without context. There is no shared history of arguments or responsibilities. There is no daily exposure to mundane realities. The interaction is curated, selective, heightened. In that environment, desire feels effortless again. But notice what is being activated. It is not necessarily superior love. It is contrast. Contrast between responsibility and freedom, between predictability and spontaneity, between being known as a role and being seen as a possibility. An affair can feel intoxicating because it restores the tension between closeness and distance. You are seen, but not fully known. Desired, but not domesticated. The deeper question for good marriages is not how to eliminate familiarity. That is impossible. But how to prevent familiarity from erasing individuality. Do you still cultivate parts of your life that are independent? Do you pursue interests, friendships, ambitions that allow your partner to see you as evolving? Or have you both collapsed into a single predictable rhythm? When partners stop growing as individuals, desire often declines not because love has vanished, but because vitality has narrowed. Desire thrives when you can occasionally see your partner from a slight distance, when you witness them in competence, in passion, in confidence, beyond the shared routine. When you observe them engaged in their own world. This is why autonomy is erotic. It is also why constant proximity without renewal can dampen attraction. In good marriages, couples often prioritize harmony and efficiency over play and exploration. They focus on maintaining peace, managing tasks, preventing disruption. But desire requires some disruption. It requires moments that break pattern, not chaos, but novelty. New conversations, new experiences, new expressions of intimacy. If erotic energy is not consciously nurtured, it does not disappear. It seeks stimulation elsewhere. Again, this is not justification. It is recognition of human complexity. The individual who engages in an affair may not be seeking a different partner as much as they are seeking a different feeling. The feeling of being alive, unpredictable, magnetic. The tragedy is that these feelings can often be rekindled within the marriage, but only if both partners acknowledge the tension between security and desire. We must ask ourselves, have we allowed our relationship to become safe but stagnant? Have we mistaken stability for vitality? A good marriage is not only one that avoids crisis, it is one that remains dynamic. Desire does not survive on autopilot. It survives on intentional renewal. So the question is not whether familiarity exists, it always will. The question is whether you are willing to reintroduce curiosity, independence, and novelty into a bond that has become too predictable. Because desire does not die from time alone. It fades when we stop seeing each other as evolving, separate, and alive. A relationship does not become unsafe because two people disagree. It becomes unsafe when they no longer dare to tell the truth.